Here's the base for the AMT Ertl 1/20th scale Budweiser Clydesdale 8-horse hitch. Whew, that is a mouthful. I've finished laying all 1,995 handmade cork pavers. I even have some extras just in case. And all in all, I think they turned out really nice. Much better than the molded cobblestones. I didn't like how the molded edges of the base looked, so I wrapped it in 1.5mm white styrene sheet. It brings the edge up to the level of the pavers and just makes for a cleaner, tidier look all around. To make the bricks look more like bricks, I'm going to cover them with plaster. Can you use plaster of Paris instead of plaster? Yes, but I have plaster on hand, so that's what I'm going to use. Notice I've put down a drop cloth on the workbench because this is going to get messy. I'm going to mix this plaster to the consistency of pudding. Don't you hate it when somebody tells you that they're going to mix something to a certain consistency and then don't show you what their consistency is? Well, here it is. Butterscotch. I started by mixing 1 tablespoon of plaster with 2 tablespoons of water, and that made what looked like 2% milk. I added another tablespoon of plaster and that did the job, so 1-to-1 ratio, water to plaster. My stir stick or a sculpting spatula didn't seem up to the task of applying all this plaster, so I used a putty knife and worked in manageable sections. After letting it set up for a bit, I used an old toothbrush to work the surface of the bricks. You probably can't see it, but there's plenty of plaster spraying off of the brush onto the drop cloth. Happy with how that section looked, it was time to put more plaster down and repeat the process all the way to the other end of the base. During this process, I've found varying the pressure and direction of the brushstrokes helped create variation in the recesses between the pavers, and that made them look natural. After all the plaster was down, but before letting the base dry for 24 hours, I stippled the paver surface with a microcell sponge to eliminate any brushstrokes and cleaned up the plaster that had gathered along the styrene edges. It's been 24 hours and this looks good. The next step is to hit it with flat gray primer. Just good old hardware store primer will do the job. Primed and ready for paint, I've chosen to go a traditional red for these pavers. I'll use Vallejo Red Terracotta, number 72.772, and Burnt Red, number 70.814. I placed a generous amount of both colors on a glass palette, far enough away from each other so I could use either color by itself or mix them in various ratios to get that natural variation you see in bricks and pavers. At this point, it's just paint and bricks. I used a wide, flat hobby brush and went to work. Obviously, I didn't want a sloppy mess, but I wasn't worried about making sure the paint got between the bricks because those would be delineated later in the process. If you look at streets with brick pavers, you'll see they aren't uniform in color. So I would mix the two colors and work them both on the glass palette and on the base to get what appeared to me a natural variation. Again, I wasn't too concerned about complete coverage, and some gray poking through here and there wasn't going to matter. Again, I'm not so concerned about consistent coverage as much as I am the variations from light to dark, as you can see here. I've made a wash of Vallejo Dark Gray Wash, number 517, and mixed it with Vallejo Terracotta, that same color that I used for the pavers earlier. Using a technique I learned from FineScale modeler contributor Kathy Millett, I dipped a microcell sponge in the wash and then dabbed it randomly across the pavers. This creates more of the variation I'd expect to see in bricks and also creates some depth and shading. You don't want to blot out all of your previous work, so don't overdo this. Here's the effect after it's dried. Very natural looking bricks. I sprayed this with a flat clear coat to protect the work so far. For the last painting step, I mixed a wash of burnt umber and mineral spirits and brushed it over all of the pavers from end to end. And this tied together all those colors that I've used up to this point. You don't have to use an oil wash. Any dark brown color will do, but this is what I had on hand. You could, for instance, use an enamel wash or an acrylic wash, whatever you're comfortable with. Yes, the wash will be glossy. Don't let that bother you. Make any adjustments you think necessary, let the wash dry completely, and then spray another coat of flat clear onto your work. The flat coat not only locks in what you've done, but it helps tone it down and tie it all together. At this point, you might turn to pastels or pigments to continue weathering, but to me, this base is way too big for that. Instead, I used grout. It comes in large bags, is finely ground, and is reasonably inexpensive for the amount that you get. Plus, I had some on hand from a home improvement project, so I went ahead and I laid down some newspaper to contain the mess. After the grout was down, I rubbed it into the surface of the bricks. Not super hard, but firmly, just to get it to set. And I added more where I thought it appropriate. I want the street to appear used, not super dusty or muddy. With that in mind, I wiped the grout off with a damp sponge. Using a light touch, I left accumulated dirt between the bricks with just a bit on top of the pavers. Then I let it dry. I'm happy with how this has turned out. I have plenty of dirt between the bricks and a nice amount on top of them. And now that it's dry, I can adjust the look with a paper towel, soft cloth, or brush, and move the grout to where I think it needs to be. To affix the grout, apply a 50-50 mix of water and isopropyl alcohol to the base to wet the grout and get it to stick. However, that will eventually evaporate, leaving us in the same position as before, dry grout. The answer is to follow up with a 2 to 1 to 1 mix of white glue, water, and isopropyl alcohol, something the model railroader editors affectionately call booze glue. As when applying the plaster, I'm working in stages. Apply the alcohol-water mix, then come in with the booze glue to hold it all in place. Just smooth it on with your finger. Gloves are useful. The glue will dry a glossy clear. I'm super happy with how that's turned out. It looks very much like the street I've been using as a reference, and that's satisfying. I like the random way in which the dirt has accumulated, but it doesn't look like mortar, and that's an important detail to me. Now, it's time to mask and paint the edges. I masked the bricks with paint and newsprint and sealed the edges of the tape with burnt red to help prevent paint bleed. Or, if there was any paint bleed, it would be the color of the bricks. And then I airbrushed the sides, flat black. Then the mask came off. After all that work, this is how it turned out. I just need to flat coat, which I'm not going to bore you with. Then, I'm ready to start placing Clydesdales and a big old Budweiser wagon on it. If you've been thinking about tackling a project like this, I hope this video has been helpful. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.